Hi folks, Seth Leapson here. Thanks for watching my monologue. In these uncertain times, you may be thinking about personal protection. If you are, I urge you to visit my friends at Guns Etc. They'll help you find the perfect protection for yourself and your family, and they can even teach you how to use it. They've been protecting Arizonans for over 33 years, and they stand for the great principles this country was founded upon. Or you can just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back, and happy Wednesday, December 23rd, 2020. Taking on the request and task to define conservatism has come up a few times this week, and it seems to me we might as well get to it. There are, of course, different kinds of conservatives, and I've probably been appreciable of all of them at various times. I've learned as much from the Straussians as I have traditionalists, neoconservatives, and libertarians. I think it'd be fair to say we all agree on a few things. William Bennett and John Cribb put it in a nice acronym in their book, America the Strong. They came up with the acronym FLINT. Free enterprise, limited government, individual liberty, national defense, and traditional values. Of course, there are various ways to say these things or embrace them. One definition of conservatism I've always liked was an economics of liberty and a sociology of virtue. Tocqueville observed, "It is quite understandable that when a nation is badly governed, it should develop a wish to govern itself." But he continues, "A desire for independence of this kind, stemming as it does from a specific removable cause, the evil practices of despotic government, is bound to be short-lived. Once the circumstances giving rise to it have passed away, it languishes, and what at first sight seemed a genuine love of liberty proves to have been merely hatred of a tyrant." This is the same thesis as another Frenchman, Jean-Francois Roosevelt, in his book How Democracies Perish. He wrote, "Clearly a civilization that feels guilty for everything it is and does will lack the energy and conviction to defend itself." So there are two things here, a memory and a cherishing of the circumstances that gave us our country. And here, of course, we'd be talking about the magnificence of our founding. And secondarily, a clear conviction that it is actually worth preserving as much as by it being worth defending. And it's a remarkable thing to me that the left has surrendered really both of those things. To them, our founding was not so remarkable. At best, it was racist and sexist. And this is the range, really, between Andrew Cuomo saying America was never that great and the 1619 Project. And the idea that America was not that great or remarkable has become so very commonplace that it's really the default thinking now of the left and the universities and Hollywood and all our major institutions. And that leads the left to seeing us being the bitter fruit resultant of a poisonous tree, feeling guilty in defending our interests, feeling guilty in defending this country. That is the disease of dystopia and anomie that has so characterized so much of the left and taken the near entirety of the Democratic Party with it. But back to us. Let's get at it this way. Charles Kesler writes, "Underlying our cold civil war is the fact that America is torn increasingly between two rival constitutions, two cultures, two ways of life. Political scientists sometimes distinguish between normal politics and regime politics. Normal politics takes place within a political and constitutional order and concerns means, not ends. In other words, the ends or principles are agreed upon. Debate is simply over the means. By contrast, regime politics is about who rules and for what ends or principles. It questions the nature of the political system itself. Who has rights? Who gets to vote? What do we honor or revere together as a people? I fear America may be leaving the world of normal politics and entering the dangerous world of regime politics, he says, a politics in which our political loyalties diverge more and more as they did in the 1850s between two contrary visions of the country. One vision is based on the original Constitution as amended. This is the Constitution grounded in the natural rights of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution written in 1787 and ratified in 1788. It has been transmitted to us with, of course, significant amendments, some improvements, some not. But it is recognizable still as the original Constitution. To simplify matters, we may call this the conservative Constitution, with the caveats that conservatives have never agreed perfectly on its meaning, and that many non-conservatives also remain loyal to it. The other vision is based on what progressives and liberals have called the living Constitution. This term implies that the original Constitution is dead, or at least on life support, and that in order to remain relevant to our national life, the original Constitution must be infused with new meanings and new ends, and therefore new duties and rights and powers. To cite an example, new administrative agencies must be created to circumvent the structural limitations that the original Constitution imposed on government. As a doctrine, the living Constitution originated in America's new departments of political and social science in the late 19th century, but it was soon at the very forefront of progressive politics. One of the doctrine's prime formulators, Woodrow Wilson, had contemplated as a young scholar a series of constitutional amendments to reform America's national government into a parliamentary system able to facilitate faster political change. But he quickly realized that his plan to amend the Constitution wouldn't go very far. So Plan B was what we have now, the living Constitution. While keeping the outward forms of the old Constitution, the idea of a living Constitution would change utterly the spirit in which the Constitution was understood. The resulting Constitution, the liberal Constitution, is not a constitution of natural rights or individual human rights, but of historical or evolutionary rights. Wilson called the spirit of the old Constitution Newtonian after Isaac Newton, and that of the new Constitution Darwinian after Charles Darwin. By Darwinian, Wilson meant that instead of being difficult to amend, the liberal Constitution would be easily amenable to experimentation and adjustment or growth. To paraphrase Walter Burns, the point of the old Constitution was to keep the times in tune with the Constitution. The purpose of the new is to keep the Constitution in tune with the times. Until the 1960s, most liberals believed it was inevitable that their living Constitution would replace the conservative Constitution through a kind of slow-motion evolution. But during the 60s, the New Left abandoned evolution for revolution, and partly in reaction to that, defenders of the old Constitution began not merely to fight back, but to call for a return to America's first principles. By seeking to revolve back to the starting point, conservatives proved to be Newtonians after all, and also in a way revolutionary, since the original meaning of revolution is to return to where you began. The conservative campaign against the inevitable victory of the living Constitution gained steam as a campaign against the gradual or sudden disappearance of limited government and of Republican virtue in our political life. And when it became clear by the late 1970s and 80s that the conservatives weren't going away, the cold Civil War began. Confronted by sharper, deeper, and more compelling accounts of the conservative Constitution, the liberals had to sharpen or radicalize their own alternative, following the paths paved by the New Left. As a result, the gap between the liberal and conservative constitutions became wider to the extent that today we are two countries, or we are fast on the road to becoming two countries, each constituted differently. Consider the contrast. The prevailing liberal doctrine of rights traces individual rights to memberships in various groups, racial, ethnic, gender, class, which are undergoing a continual process of consciousness raising and empowerment. This was already a prominent feature of the progressivism well over a century ago, though the groups have changed since then. Before Woodrow Wilson became a politician, for example, he wrote a political science textbook, and the book opened by asking which races should be studied. Wilson answered, "We'll study the Aryan race because the Aryan race is the one that has mastered the world. The countries of Europe and the Anglophone countries are the conquerors and colonizers of other continents. They are the countries with the most advanced armaments, arts, and scientists," he said. Wilson was perhaps not a racist in the full sense of the term because he expected the less advanced races over time to catch up with the Aryan race, but his emphasis was on group identity, an emphasis that liberals today retain, the only difference being that the winning and losing sides have been scrambled. Today, the white race and European civilization are the enemy. Dead white males is a favored pejorative on American campuses. And the races and groups that were oppressed in the past are the ones that today need compensation or privileges and power. Conservatives, by contrast, regard the individual as the quintessential endangered minority. They trace individual rights to human nature, which lacks a race. Human nature also lacks ethnicity, gender, class. Conservatives trace the idea of rights to the essence of an individual as a human being. We have rights because we're human beings with souls, with reason, distinct from other animals, and also God. We're not beasts, but we're not God. We're the in-between. Conservatives seek to vindicate human equality and liberty, the basis for majority rule in politics, against the liberal constitution's alternative, in which everything is increasingly based on group identity. There's also today a vast divergence between the liberal and conservative understandings of the First Amendment. Liberals are interested in transforming free speech into what they call equal speech, ensuring that no one gets more than his fair share. They favor a redistribution of speech rights via limits on campaign contributions, repealing the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision, and narrowing the First Amendment for the sake of redistribution of speech rights from rich to the poor. Not surprisingly, the Democratic Party's 2016 platform called for amending the First Amendment. There is, of course, also a big difference between the liberal Constitution's freedom from religion and the conservative Constitution's freedom of religion. And needless to say, the liberal Constitution has no Second Amendment. In terms of government structure, the liberal Constitution is designed to overcome the separation of powers and most other checks and balances. Liberals consistently support the increased ability to coordinate, concentrate, and enhance government power as opposed to dividing, restricting, and checking it. This is to the detriment of popular control of government. In recent decades, government power has flowed mainly through the hands of unelected administrators and judges, to the point that elected members of Congress find themselves increasingly unable to legislate. As the Financial Times put it, Congress is a sausage factory that has forgotten how to make sausages. If one thinks about how America's cold Civil War could be resolved, there seem to be only a few possibilities. One would be to change the political subject. Ronald Reagan used to say that when the little green men arrive from outer space, all of our political differences will be transcended and humanity will unite for the first major time in human history. Similarly, if some jarring event intervenes, a major war or calamity, it could reset our politics. We look today at what we're going through and we see that to be ever elusive. A second possibility, if we can't change the subjects, is that we could change our minds. Persuasion, or some combination of persuasion and moderation, might allow us to end or endure our great political division. Perhaps one party or side will persuade a significant majority of the electorate to embrace its constitution and thus win at the polling booth and in the legislatures. For generations, Republicans have longed for a realigning election that would turn the GOP into America's majority party. This remains possible, but today seems unlikely. Only 2 presidents in the 20th century were able to effect enduring changes in American public opinion and voting patterns. Franklin Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan. FDR inspired a political realignment that lasted for a generation or so and lifted the Democratic Party to majority status. Ronald Reagan inspired a realignment of public policy but wasn't quite able to make the GOP the majority party. Since about 1968, the norm in America has been divided government. The people have more often preferred to split control of the national government between the Democrats and Republicans rather than to fully entrust it into one party. This had not previously been the pattern of American politics. Prior to 1968, Americans would almost always entrust the Senate, the House of Representatives, and the presidency to the same party in each election. They would occasionally change the party, but they still would vote for a party to run the government. Not so over the last 50 years. And neither President Obama nor President Trump has persuaded the American electorate to embrace his party as their national representative, worthy of a long-time patriotic allegiance. And it seems to me the trend right now, given the cultural institutions and the culture, is that we are, to use a phrase from the historian David McCullough, in pretty deep soup. We better get it right. I'm Seth Leibson. I'll be right back.